All right, we are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us this Monday. Let's get to it now. We're going to talk some politics and the like. Thomas Schwartz, professor from over at Vanderbilt, is joining us now. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, Nick. I'm doing well.
It is nice to see you. What do you want to talk about today? There's a lot going on. I've got a bunch of topics as I was touching bases on, but what do you think is the news coming out of the weekend we should talk about that caught your eye?
I think it's the ongoing issues between the president and Congress over this COVID stimulus bill and what will happen as a result of that. I think that's foremost on people's minds. Are you going to get this unemployment benefit? Are you going to stop evictions? This sort of thing.
Yeah, and what he can legally or not legally do. And I think what we know is the president did sign a few executive orders right now while Congress continues to bicker over any future payment plan. And so the way I understand it, among other things, unemployment anyway, which is a little separate from a stimulus plan, but unemployment, he signed an executive order, right, Professor, for $400 and then saying a week to continue unemployment benefits going, and that the state would kick in another 100. And where does that kind of stand with regard to that executive order and whether or not that can immediately take effect, or if there could be a legal challenge to it, or how does that work?
I think there may be a legal challenge to it in terms of the president's authority. It's not something that I think Nancy Pelosi wants to challenge legally, but there are some real problems with the president shifting money on his own from FEMA to pay for this. And also the problem is that he is asking for the states to contribute 100 to that 400, and some of the states are in really bad fiscal shape. So there may be some tie-ups on that. I think the best that we can hope for is that the president's orders will stimulate some sort of a compromise in Congress that will give us something much more directly that's legal and that can be put into effect quickly.
You know, what's interesting about this is we obviously have President Trump, who is a sitting Republican president. And when you see what's happening in Congress, it's almost as though, the Democrats have already, kind of passed a $2 billion or $3 billion plan that the Republicans are balking at. It's almost as though the president wants to give more. The Democrats seem to want to, and the Republicans are holding back, saying, look, I don't think we need to give such a big stimulus. Is that kind of the way that you're reading it?
Well, it's actually $3 trillion.
$3 trillion. $3 trillion, right.
Trillion.
These numbers boggle my mind. They boggle my mind.
They boggle the imagination, and there are some Republicans who don't think that much is necessary, and there is a genuine argument there about how much is really necessary. The Democrats have gone full blast on this, and then they do want a very, very large appropriation, and there is substantial difference between them and some of the Republicans, and the Republicans are somewhat divided on this. There are a fair number of senators who don't want to vote for this, and Mitch McConnell knows that he needs some Democratic support in order to get it through the Senate. So it's a complicated issue, and I thought they were close to some sort of an agreement. The Republicans were willing to go up to about $1 trillion. The Democrats might have been willing to come down, but the president has decided to try and do it himself, taking a page out of some of what President Obama did with executive orders, and he's trying to push through this argument. I don't know where it'll go, though.
Yeah, and you wonder, too, against any type of action like this, you have to filter it through politics. And, you can see the president with an upcoming election thinking, well, if I can give some benefit, it might help with votes for me, which is understandable. And I just wonder, too, though, about the unemployment benefit being extended. That's kind of separate from a stimulus plan like it was last time in a way. I know they both kind of feed the same monster, but I know that there are some that are saying, look, with unemployment, that's different than giving every American a stimulus check to try to get business going and support those. Whereas there were some who argued the last unemployment benefit in place almost created an incentive for people to remain unemployed because they were making more money from that benefit than they were on their job when you combine their state plus the $600 they were getting from the federal government. I've heard that argument coming, especially from Republicans in Congress.
Yes, yeah. I think where the president's trying to finesse that by slightly lowering that benefit, but also then doing this temporary thing with the payroll tax, which affects everyone earning less than $100,000. So he's trying to do something along both lines of reducing the burdens on Americans, trying to extend it. He has probably more constitutional authority on the payroll tax to defer it than he does on this, the unemployment. But it is designed to keep the economy stimulated, to prevent greater hardship with such a high unemployment level. But it would be helpful if you could get some sort of compromise in Congress that enjoyed bipartisan support. It's just very hard to do that in an election year.
Can you give me a little perspective? I don't know how well you can answer this, but I have more than a few people who have commented and asked the question about, all right, one stimulus and all this money going out to Americans, and now this other thing and the $400, and they're just wondering where the heck this money's coming from, because we know in general, I mean, the government is strapped for cash. Taxes are being reduced or not being paid as much as they could because people are out of work. Where the heck is this money coming from? Is it just adding to the bloated deficit? And I know that the stimulus is needed for many folks, but they're just wondering, where the heck's the money coming from?
It is going to be part of the American debt. This is, if you look at your children and grandchildren, they're responsible for it. It is part of that. The bet is, of course, that the result of this will lead to economic recovery, economic growth, and that eventually some of this debt can be retired. That has not exactly been the case in recent years, and essentially we are pushing the issue onto our children and grandchildren.
Well, we just had the primary election, if you will, here in Tennessee, and moving forward now till November. And just wanted, first of all, as it stands now, I mean, different things being floated out there one way or the other with regard to the election date. Regardless of what happens, barring just some catastrophe beyond what we've already faced, there is no way election of a president can be postponed, is there? I mean, you've heard the president even kind of allude to this, and I don't know, just briefly mentioning something like, well, we may have to postpone the election. Where, I mean, there's just no way that can happen, is there?
Well, if you think about it, in American history, there have been two similar times, the Civil War and World War II, in which you had full national mobilization and in which you had, you know, huge numbers of people being preoccupied with military and with the fighting the wars. And in both those cases, the election went on. So it would take something pretty catastrophic to try and actually change the election date. That's not going to happen. So
that would be my guess. Well, listen, let's take a break. We'll get more into some of the politics and where things stand, and even talk about what we might expect to hear from the challenger, Joe Biden, this week. A lot of people expect a big announcement from him, and we can take some phone calls if any of you have thoughts or questions about the stimulus or some of these things we see happening with politics right now. Even here in Tennessee, we can touch on that with how things played out in that heated Senate race for the Republican nomination to replace Lamar Alexander. The number is 737-7587. Professor Schwartz and I will be back right after this.
This is a